So basically, once I get the screen going, just make sure it's still in the frame. Get up here, and we'll get started. All right, everything look good on the frame there? So we had a lot of people asking if we could live stream, so I said we'll make it happen. Yeah, if we get those lights, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. So as we get started, I want to start off by kind of painting a little bit of a picture here. How many of you all have read some books, something like maybe Harry Potter? Yeah, or like some Star Wars books, or I know one of the only books Dad's ever read in his life was Flight of the Intruder, and from like the 1980s, and so I've read the Harry Potter books, right? And it's a really good series. One of the very few series that's fictional that I've ever actually read more than once. And when we read books like Harry Potter, it's really easy to just get sucked into this world. And you're reading these descriptions of like Hogwarts, and you've just got this, big, beautiful castle-like school, and you just feel like you're there when you're reading the book. And you actually, for anybody that has a fictional book that they have read and have enjoyed, you actually develop like an emotional connection to the characters and to the places in this book. I remember when I finished reading the Hunger Games books, I was so like distraught by the way it ended. Like I just had to like go out for a hike and just like clear my head. I'm like, but it was fictional. Like it's not a true story, right? It's totally made up. But the way that these books are written, they're written with just such graphic detail, and it just draws you into the storyline. But then how many people, their all-time favorite book was their 7th grade history textbook? Yeah. Daryl, all right, now we know who the nerd is. Randall, all right, we got 2 people. All right. Yeah, guilty as charged. All right? Yeah, so when you open up like a history book, or say like an almanac or something like that, and you're reading like you're just reading the text, and you're just reading like a description of the Mississippi River, and like you just read like the numbers, like it's X miles long, it's X meters wide. Okay, got it. Yeah, cool. But do we really feel like an emotional connection to these places when we read like a history book, and just really feel like, I belong to the house of Harry Potter? We don't get that when we're reading a history book, because they're written with different intents, right? A history book is written to convey facts, to explain what is. But a fictional book is written to captivate our attention in order to draw us into this fictional world and entice us in that way. And so a lot of times I think we forget about that when we approach our Bibles, because it's a history book. It's a book of what was and what is. It's not a book that was written to toy with our emotions and convince us that we need to belong to the house of Harry Potter. Gryffindor, that's it. How to think about it, right? It's a history book that tells the truth of what God has done for his people and how we've messed up, and what he did about when we messed up. And so it's really easy when we open up our Bibles to just start reading through it and be like, okay, I mean, this is cool, but like, so what? Unless we really take the time to understand ourselves and our own spiritual needs. But all that to say, being able to go on this trip to Israel, and this is the group that I went with from Freed-Hardeman University, it really made the Bible come alive. In the same way that you can't really appreciate the Grand Canyon until you see it for yourself, it's really difficult to truly understand visually what these Bible places look like until you see it for yourself. And so I'm going to do my best to share some pictures with you to help bring Israel here. And I even brought some of Israel here on the table. Some non-contraband stuff we were allowed to take. But I tried to pick up a few like little stones or little pottery shards here and there from some of the different places I went to. This is like my own like little personal museum here. It probably is not going to mean a lot to you guys, because it's like, oh, okay, that's all right. But these are just charged with memories of me being there. And so if you come look, feel free to look. The only one I took out of the bag is the bag from Shiloh where we were digging. And so those are really cool, because those were pieces I actually was able to find myself and bring back. And they're very small, so be careful if you're touching them and whatnot. But feel free to come up later if you want to look at them. So with all that said, and with that introduction out of the way, let's just dive in. So the way I have this done is I'm just going to go day by day. 11 full days there, and I'm just going to start. Day 1, May 26th, we're flying in to Tel Aviv, the Tel Aviv airport, and Tel Aviv, I mean, we're flying overhead, and here's the city of Tel Aviv, and something that was immediately visible and apparent was just the climate. You know, it's a very arid, dry, desert-like climate. Like, there is some vegetation, but it's not just a dark picture here. Like, it's just not a very fertile ground. Like, it's not lush and green. It's not West Virginia. Something that Randall and Sherry was commenting on earlier. They don't have in this area quite the fertility that our soil does here, and it's just not quite as green. But Tel Aviv Airport, to put it on a map, this is a modern-day map. So Tel Aviv is right here. Do I have in my notes exactly how far from Jerusalem it is? I don't think I do. But I'm gonna ballpark it at about 50 miles. Don't hold me to that. But about 50 miles to the west of Jerusalem. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. Great fishing in Tel Aviv. But there's something else about this map that's kind of important that I want you to take note of. And that's Tel Aviv is located in what used to be Philistine territory during the time of David, backwards in history. And the Philistines had 5 major cities that they occupied. And those cities were Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, Gaza, and Ekron. Well, what do you see here? We see Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod. The other 2 were destroyed. But when we read the Bible, we're not reading about some fictional, made-up, mysterious place that's just lost forever. This isn't Atlantis that we're reading about. This isn't some, like, Nephi from the Book of Mormon that we're reading about that there's no evidence for. Like, these are cities that still exist today. and to read about Ashkelon in our Bibles, it would be like reading about the city of Philadelphia today for the United States. Like, these are just cities that have always been populated. There's no question about their existence. And it's something that we can too easily overlook because it's not exactly something, they're not teaching Bible geography in our public schools. And so we kind of take for granted how real these places actually are. But with that said, Tel Aviv is the airport. It's a very secular city. And so when we were packing to go to Israel, we were given a packing list. We were told, dress conservatively because it's a religious nation, right? Muslim, Jewish, Judaism, those are the 2 main religions there. Very, 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 very small Christian population. And so you have to dress conservatively. So pretty much all of our clothes are like pants and like long sleeves or at least collared shirts. And so we land in Tel Aviv and we get off the airplane and like, I could have been in San Francisco. I mean, there's like booty cut jean shorts and like crop tops, and I'm like, did we land in the right place? I think we missed a stop somewhere. And so Tel Aviv is a very secular, very, very secular city, and it's not typical of most of the country. And the first place we went to after landing is the city of Joppa, or Jaffa. It's pronounced both ways. You'll see it spelled both ways in my presentation because I don't know which way is the favored way. So Joppa, which is something, it is a place that we do read about in our Bibles, and it still exists today. It's part of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has grown over it, but there's still a district that's known as Ancient Joppa, Old City Joppa, there today. So here's a picture from the port. And so Joppa, during Bible times, in the Old Testament times, I should say, was the only seaport between Egypt and the northern Mediterranean. It was the only seaport there. So because of that, it was a very, very real estate's expensive. Okay, I'll put it that way. All right, high populous, high trade route, very important city. And so to put this on a map during the time of Joshua, during the time of the Israelites, because we talked about Joshua a lot this morning, it would have been in the region that was allotted to Dan. Now, notice the proximity here to these other cities. Here's Philistia, here's Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron. Joppa is right here. Notice the close proximity. Who are the Danites next door neighbors? The Philistines. Right? I'm watering that seed from this morning. We'll talk about that more later. Okay? Just planting that seed, get a little water. So there's Joppa on the map. It's the city of Tel Aviv. But then as we get into the city, and we start looking at the streets of Joppa. Actually, before I explain some of these pictures, just a little bit more background. So the city of Joppa, just so you know, there have been mud brick structures and buildings that have been excavated by archaeologists that date back like pre-Israelite time, like pre-Joshua, like as far back as possibly Abraham. There's a certain window far back where it's hard for them to get precise. And so really they date it to the Middle Bronze area, which is basically older than 1500 BC. So it predates the Exodus event of Canaanite buildings and structures that were there. And in 1458 BC, they know this because of scarabs and other Egyptian artifacts that were found. The city of Joppa was conquered by the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose III. Thutmose III predates the Exodus by about 10 years. And so this was when the Israelites are preparing and God is preparing Moses for the Exodus event 10 years before that, approximately. The Egyptians are waging war. And I'm going to hit on that again in the future. But know that Egypt is not just one country during the Old Testament time. Egypt's actually an empire. It's something I didn't really realize until learning some more of the history that I'm hopefully going to have time for this evening. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But this land belonged to the Egyptians during the time of Joshua's conquest. It was owned by Egypt. And then fast forward to the time of Jesus, the land was gifted to Herod the Great by Julius Caesar in 47 BC. So Herod the Great, we know him as Herod the infanticidal maniac, all right, the guy who genocides the infants in Bethlehem under 2 years old. He's known as Herod the Great because he knew how to politic. He knew how to rub elbows with all the right people. And there's no right person better than the emperor and better than the Caesar and Julius at the time. And so Herod the Great was best friends with Caesar, and then he was best friends with Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And so the city was given to Herod, and then Herod repays him by saying, hey, thanks, Julius, but I'm going to go up and build another city and dedicate it to Augustus. Because Julius gets stabbed in the back by his best friends, quite literally. And so his best friend, Herod the Great, says, oh, people don't like Julius? Well, that means I better not like Julius too, so I'm going to be friends with Augustus now. So he knew how to play both sides of the political aisle there, whatever was advantageous to him. And so there's a little bit of the background. Streets of Joppa look like this. So these are all pictures that I was able to take. Had the question, would you believe it? Randall was asking me about food in Israel. And so here was my first meal in Israel was a gyro. And so it was very delicious food. Very delicious food. But the old town Jaffa, right? So a lot of these buildings date back several hundreds of years. I'm not sure if any of these in this picture, I don't think any of them date as far back as the 1st century, but they do date back different buildings, thousands of years, especially during the Crusader time period. And it is a Muslim city, and so while we were there, we spent a couple hours there. We heard the Muslim prayer chant, because Muslims pray publicly 5 times a day, and there's over there, they have a citywide intercom system that will offer the calls to prayers, so we heard that going on while we were there. And so what all happens at Joppa that's biblically significant? Well, number one, as I said, it's the world's oldest port that we know of. The city of Joppa is believed to have been founded by Noah's son, Japheth. So they get off the ark, and the sons part ways, and Japheth founds this city. And it becomes the world's longest surviving port city. And fast forward to the time of Jonah, and Jonah is called by God to go preach a gospel message, if you will, to Israel's sworn enemies, the Assyrians, to go to Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and to preach repentance to them. And Jonah says, hey, no way, Yahweh, I ain't going that way, all right? I'm going to go the opposite direction, okay? So what does Jonah do to avoid going to Nineveh, which would be upwards in modern-day Syria? It would have been northeast for him. And so Jonah goes to the port in Jaffa to board a boat, and he says, get me out of here. I'm going to the ends of the earth to avoid God's command. He wants to go to Tarshish. Tarshish is on the far west side of the Mediterranean, the present-day Spain. It's literally, at that time, the end of the earth. Like, that's the end of known earth at this time. And so Jonah's trying to avoid God as much as possible, but we know you can't resist God. Okay? So we know how the story of Jonah goes. But that that happens here in Joppa. If we go to New Testament times, bear with me just a second, and if you want to grab your own Bibles, just briefly, if you want to turn to Acts chapter 9 in verse 36, there's kind of something important that happens here with Peter and Peter's life. Acts 9 verse 36. Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. She was full of good works and acts of charity, and in those days she became ill and died. And when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. And since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him, urging him, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter rose and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the upper room. And all the widows stood beside him weeping, and showing him tunics and other garments that Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all aside, knelt down, and prayed, and turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up, and he gave her his hand and raised her up. Then calling the saints and the widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one, Simon, a tanner. And I'll read just a verse or two from chapter 10. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household and gave alms generously to the people and prayed continually to God. And I'll stop there because I don't have time to read all of chapter 10. But this house here overlooks the Mediterranean Sea, and by relatively modern tradition, really only as far back as the Crusader time period of around the 1100s, it's a tradition that this was Simon the Tanner's house, where Peter stayed after resurrecting Tabitha. Now, it can't be the literal building because the building isn't old enough to be first century time period. Could it have been in this area? Yeah. We know it was in the city of Joppa, and this is in the old city of Joppa. We don't really know if it was literally this house, but relatively modern tradition says that it was located here. So it was just kind of neat to think of the possibility that, hey, this is where Peter hooked up with an Airbnb for a few nights while he was in Joppa. So as we go forward a little bit, I gotta get my slideshow back up over here first. One other thing from Joppa, not biblically significant, but just for the history buffs that are out there. Joppa is also the city for the Greek legend of Andromeda, where the king and queen of the land, they praise their daughter as being more beautiful than angelic beings. I don't remember the whole story, but of divine beings. And so as punishment, the gods get jealous for Andromeda being praised as being more beautiful than they are. So they punish her by chaining her to a rock out in the port to feed her to a sea beast. And then the god Perseus, one of the sons of Zeus, comes and rescues her on a Pegasus. And so by Greek legend, that happened here. Just a little fun fact. All right, so the reason I wanted to go with chapter 10, the first couple verses, is because the next place we went to was Caesarea, the home of Cornelius, the centurion of the Italian cohort, which basically means he was a very important guy. Okay, he was a well-known Roman leader. This was like a head officer in the Roman army. Very important figure militarily and politically in the land. So for him to have been receptive to the gospel message of Christ is wonderful, because he would have had such an extensive network throughout the empire that his own personal testimony may have attributed to untold number of conversions throughout the rest of his life. But we don't know. I'm reading a lot into the text here, but knowing his position and his faith, it's very reasonable to believe that his connections and his leadership could have brought many to Christ if he was serving the Lord the way that the Lord commands us to evangelize. And so Caesarea Maritima is located to the north of Joppa. Remember, Joppa is Tel Aviv. So to the north up in Caesarea. And so there's something really neat up in Caesarea. And I'll show you a couple pictures here in just a moment. But just to give that historical backdrop, actually, I'll go ahead and share the picture. That way you can at least see what I'm talking about when I describe this. So this is an artistic rendition. I actually bought a book over in Israel. I had a lot of these pictures of like first century times just so I could take a picture of the book to put it in these slides. I don't know if that's legal, but you know what? I did it. Too late. So if somebody wants the book, I'll give the credit to the book later. But Herod builds this city, and he wants to build a magnificent port city And he names it after Augustus Caesar, Caesarea. Caesar, he names it after Caesar Augustus. And Herod, he's known as Herod the Great because he was one of the world's most famous architects and engineers at the time. Now, I'm not saying he himself was the engineer building things, but he was the mind behind it that laid out the plans and told people, hey, if I want this built here, then it's going to get done. And so Herod the Great, he loved certain features, and so he loved theater. And so in many of Herod's buildings, you will have a theater, a Colosseum, contrary to our modern belief, as Colosseums being the home of gladiator games. They were actually predominantly used for Broadway shows. And so Herod loves the theater. He also loves gladiator games and horse races. So he builds hippodromes, which is the name of like a chariot racetrack, a hippodrome, which would be right here. And he loves pools and public baths. And so here's his palace, Herod's palace, and right here is his pool, right along the Mediterranean. And then over here, he loves Augustus Caesar, right? Because he's a great politician who's always sucking up to the emperor. And so here's a temple dedicated to Augustus Caesar. Looks oddly like the same temple you saw from the gates of Hades from this morning, right? Because Herod had that one built too, up north, because he loves Augustus. And so what's really fascinating about this port, this harbor, is it is the world's first man-made harbor. And the reason it's the world's first man-made harbor is before the time of Herod, they couldn't get concrete, if you will, to cure underwater. During the time of Herod, they discovered this new form of hydraulic concrete using a form of lava, rock, and ash that would actually harden while it's underwater. And so thanks to the genius of Herod, they're able to build out into the sea for the first time ever in man's history that we know of, and build this magnificent and beautiful harbor. So what are some biblical events that happen here? So I'll back up on the slide. So we've got the account of Peter and Cornelius. Peter, right, he gets the vision that all things are clean. And it's not a vision that says, Peter, you get to eat steaks. It's a vision that, hey, even the Gentiles are to hear the gospel message. That Gentiles are not filthy people. They're people that need Jesus, just the same the Jews do. And so he receives that vision in Joppa and then goes to Caesarea to preach to Cornelius. In Acts chapter 12, it's where Herod Agrippa is struck dead by an angel. And if you read that account, I'm not going to take time to read it right now, but if you read the account in Acts chapter 12, Herod is struck dead when he's giving a public proclamation. And so, given the traditions of the first century, almost certainly, we don't know for sure, but almost certainly, Herod Agrippa, when he was struck dead by an angel, would have been in the hippodrome, because he had a throne at the hippodrome where he would address the public. So if the public would gather together to appeal to the governor and to be addressed by the governor, they would do so in the hippodrome. And so Herod Agrippa very likely would have been here in the hippodrome on his throne addressing an audience when the angel struck him dead. And it's because he did not give God the glory. And one other big event here is it is the place of Paul's imprisonment. So Paul goes to Jerusalem, and there's assassins there trying to kill him. And he's arrested for preaching the gospel message. And so because there's this group of assassins after him, they have to transport Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea for safekeeping, so that he can have an actual trial, if you will, before being assassinated. And so that his prison is here under Herod's palace. And so we already talked about the amphitheater, stones and columns. I want to get to Paul's prison. So the only thing about stones and columns is here's a map that shows all the sources of marble during the time that Herod was building these structures. He got marbles from sources from Middle Egypt all the way up through Greece. So he had quarries all over the Mediterranean that he was sourcing these stones and these marble columns from. He also built an aqueduct that was 16 kilometers long to draw in fresh water. Here's a view today of Herod's palace. His palace was here. The hippodrome was here. Just another picture of that. Here's another view of that. All right, Paul's prison So what they found while they're excavating the palace ground here is they find a prison system underneath the palace. And I don't know about you guys, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you would want prisoners in the basement of your king, of your governor. And so the theory is that these prison cells were reserved for like special prisoners, higher class citizens. Paul being a Roman citizen, okay? Paul being somebody who has already, at this point in his life, has already had several conversations with significant Roman leadership. And so the theory is that these would have been everything from like political prisoners to just very significant notable persons. And they found an inscription. I could be wrong on this. I don't think I have a note of it on my notes. I need to get that. But they did find an inscription in the prison giving praises to Jesus that date to around the 300s AD, possibly a little earlier than that. And so we knew that it was a prison that was used to imprison Christians. And so the historians are fairly confident that this is actually where Paul was held captive. If you read through Acts chapters 23 through 25, when he has his interactions with Felix and then Festus as the governors during the time around 57 AD, and he says, I'm a Roman citizen. All right, so here's Herod's pool today. I stuck my pinky toe in there. Here's the hippodromes, just some more pictures, chariot races, temple to Caesar. Okay, the Amarna letters. I don't have a lot of cool pictures because I didn't actually get to see these in person. And Edwin just face planted. You're all right, buddy. Tripped over his own shoestrings, even though it's a Velcro shoe. It's all right. The Amarna letters. This is going to be one you're going to want to go home and look up because these are one of the most significant finds in all of archaeology. So the Amarna letters are a series of clay tablets that were discovered in modern day Tel Amarna. I cannot say that word. Amarna, which is an ancient Egyptian city, Akhetaten, a place where the pharaohs would frequently visit. It wasn't the capital city, but it was a place where the pharaoh frequented. And these letters date to the early 1300s, 1370s time period, which places them shortly after the Israelite conquest through Canaan. And the conquest being 1400 BC, these letters date to 1370, 1390, that time period. And these letters are very diplomatic in nature, and they show and they reveal political connections that existed between Canaanite cities and the Egyptian empire. And from a biblical context, they mention the Hebrew people. They mention how now the wording that's used in the letters is Apiru, but there's enough linguists and scholars out there to say the Apiru were likely a group of Hebrews. And so these Amarna letters are from Canaanite cities writing to Egypt saying, hey, the Hebrews are taking over our lands. Talk about validation for the biblical account of history. These Amarna letters are massively important validation that there was an Israelite conquest through the Canaanite territory. And they line up so well with the biblical account. And I wanted to bring that up because it's a fascinating point in history. I'm probably going to mention it a few more times. The rest of this, I don't know if I'll get to any more this evening, but on Wednesday. But what we learned from these Amarna letters is that the Egyptian empire worked much like the British Empire in that they had colonies. And so the Canaanite cities, all throughout what we know as Israel, were actually colonies subsidiary to Egypt. They were responsible for paying taxes to Egypt. And so the Israelite conquest through the land is not just God securing the promised land, it's an attack on the Egyptian economy. God, through the Israelites, is taking away the income of the Egyptians by toppling all of their colonies. And it's recorded for us in these Amarna letters, that type of relationship. So just fascinating piece of world history. All right. So another place we got to see was Ai. Infamous battle here from Joshua chapter 7. Today it's referred to as Khirbet el-Makater. And this is a pretty important city because it is one of 3 cities that during the time of the conquest in the book of Joshua, it's one of only 3 cities that is specifically mentioned as being destroyed by the Israelites. Right? There's a lot in the text that is strongly suggestive that they destroyed many of the cities as they were conquering them, but the text is explicitly clear that in Ai and Hatzor, and off the top of my head, I'm forgetting the third one. I'm trying to find it in my notes. Jericho. How can I forget Jericho? Were the only 3 cities specifically destroyed. And so archaeologists have found this city of Ai, and it matches the biblical description and location for where it should be. And so to put it up on the map here, it's the red text over here, Kirbet El Makader. It's just some 20, 30 miles to the north of Jerusalem. And so the way that the Israelites took this land, well, actually, I'll get this slide first, just to show you the trained eye of an archaeologist. I talked about the deer hunting analogy this morning, right? I'm about to step on this pile of rock as we're just hiking up over to it, and then our guide is like, oh, by the way, this is part of the outer wall system. And I'm like, oh, I better get off of that. I don't want to knock that down anymore. But to me, it just looks like a heap of rubble. But to a trained archaeologist who knows how to recognize these types of structural patterns, they're like, nope, that's actually part of the wall system. And so we go through, here's an aerial view. So yeah, here's the Battle of Ai. And so the picture in the top right is I'm facing north, and the picture on the bottom left, I'm facing west. And it's important because as you read through the book of Joshua, Joshua has a pretty ingenious way to defeat Ai. It's a strongly, heavily fortified city at this time. They're like, how are we going to take over the city? So what Joshua does, he divides his army into 2. He sends a smaller fighting force to the hilltop to the north, right? While that fighting force is over on this hilltop, openly exposed, drawing attention to themselves, Joshua takes the main army and they hide behind the hilltop to the west. And so when the city of Ai sent all of their soldiers to combat the Israelites to the north, Joshua takes his main body force and comes in from the west and conquers the city. It's a pretty smart military tactic there. So it's just really cool for them to have found the city and to map out the way that the battle routes would have went. Pictures of the northern gate. From Ai, you can see Jerusalem. This is the Mount of Olives. It's the Mount of Olives. You can see it off in the distance. They found some luxury housing. This is based on the size of it, but also some of the artifacts, the types of pottery, the types of other evidences that they found, jewelry and stuff. They believe that this must have been like a high-ranking military official or some form of royalty that lived here. Like my notes caught up. And then one other significant site that they found is an underground workroom that was also a massacre site for the Jewish revolt in AD 67 to 70 AD. And so during the time of Jesus, this ancient city of Ai was actually known as Ephraim. It's a place that shortly before the Passover with his disciples, before his betrayal, Jesus leaves Jerusalem to escape the crowds that are seeking to kill him, and he goes to Ephraim. And so Jesus actually spent time in Ephraim shortly before his final Passover meal. And then fast forward 30 years to the time of the revolt, the Jewish revolt, they found women and children's bodies just desecrated and destroyed here, dating to the time of the 1st century. So it's believed that was during the Jewish revolt. The Roman army comes in to topple Jerusalem, to tear down the temple, and the city of Ephraim in the 1st century, or Ai, was one of the first stops that the Roman army came through and just killed and slaughtered everyone that was there. It's very unfortunate. And so we're getting a little bit low on time, and so I'm going to, possibly this will be our last location we'll talk about today, and then we'll pick up on Wednesday night. And this is, oh, sorry, here's my Iron Age turtle. That's just a joke. It's a living turtle. It's not a fossil. Because we're there, and you're here with your guide, and you're like, well, this is an Iron Age wall, and this is a Middle Bronze pottery piece, and then here's a turtle just going across. I'm like, there's an Iron Age turtle! And just a joke. All right, so Mount Abal. This is a really, really good site. I mentioned that this morning. The curse tablet that was found completely shifted the paradigm of secular history's understanding of the ancient Israelites. And so this curse tablet, to give just a little bit of background, I've got the biblical verses up on the screen. In Deuteronomy, it's when Moses receives the command from God, and Moses is commanding the Israelites that after you enter the promised land, there's going to be a Mount Ebal and a Mount Gerizim. And he's commanding the Israelites that when you get there, right, because Moses himself never gets into the promised land. Actually, that's a story for another day. He does make it to the promised land. I'll talk about that another time. But so in Deuteronomy, Moses is giving the command, hey, when you get here, you're going to go up on Mount Ebal, and you're going to be divided in half, 6 tribes. You're going to go to Mount Ebal, and that's going to be the Mount of Cursings. And you're going to record these curses that are found in Deuteronomy chapter 27, and you're going to recite these curses to remind you that if you disobey God, these curses will happen to you. And then the other 6 tribes are going to go to Mount Gerizim. It's the opposing hilltop. They're facing one another. And the 6 tribes on Mount Gerizim, they're going to have these blessings. That's recorded in Deuteronomy 28. And when they get to that hilltop, they're going to recite these blessings that if you obey God, these will come true. And so in Joshua chapter 8 is the fulfillment of that command. Joshua divides the Israelites. The priests stay in the valley of Shechem with Mount Ebal on the one side, Mount Gerizim on the other. The priests have the Ark of the Covenant in the middle. And what's really cool is the way that they would have done this, and I was listening to a podcast that talked about the history of how they did this. How many here have been to a Mountaineer football game before? Okay, I think most people have, or at least some large-scale sporting event, baseball game, football game, and some large-scale sporting event. And well, what's the big Mountaineer cheer? Ready? Let's go! Mountaineer. A little weak over there. Come on, Miranda. Come on, Miranda. You can get a little out of that, right? I'm just teasing. I'm sorry. So that's the way that the Israelites did this, right? So you would have tens of thousands of Israelites on Mount Ebal, and they would be yelling together. It's a communal way of cementing the understanding that if we disobey God, these curses will happen. In much the same way that when we're chanting, "Let's go Mountaineers," we're cheering on our team, right? So you've got tens of thousands of Israelites on Mount Ebal, and they would be shouting the curse form, and then the response to that would be tens of thousands of Jews on Mount Gerizim shouting the responsive blessing if they obey God. And so if you can imagine just audibly, if you've been part of that Let's Go Mountaineers, that's what was going on Mount Ebal when we read about this account in Joshua. And let's see here. Let's get it up on the map. So Mount Ebal is located in Shechem. Shechem's the valley where the priests were with the Ark of the Covenant when that ceremony of blessings and cursings were happening in Joshua 8. And so Shechem's down in the valley. And so this curse tablet was found. I mentioned that this morning. And the significance of that curse tablet, it's just really hard to understate it. But the text of the curse tablet reads this. It says, I don't know ancient Hebrew. I barely know biblical Hebrew after 3 semesters of taking it, so I definitely don't know an even more ancient form of it. But I'm going to trust the experts on this. This curse tablet says, "You are cursed by the God Yahweh, cursed. You will die cursed. Cursed, you will surely die. Cursed you are by Yahweh, cursed." That's a lot of cursings there. Well, if you read through Deuteronomy 27, there's a lot of cursings there. Right? So they found this curse tablet that dates to the time of Joshua on the right mountaintop in the temple area that was built there. This is the oldest document ever found containing the name Yahweh. And it was found in 2019 in a dump pile. Archaeology is very significant to validating the accuracy of the Bible. And the director of the dig at Shiloh, where we were just a few weeks ago, Dr. Scott Stripling, it was his team that found that curse tablet. And so my hat goes off to them for their keen eye to have seen it and to have studied it. And so just so we can wrap up here, finishing in this area. So here's a map of what it would look like. So the Ark of the Covenant's down in Shechem, here in the Valley City. Mount Gerizim, I'll be honest, is there a directional arrow? Yeah, north. I couldn't remember the exact direction. So Mount Ebal was the northern hilltop or tell, and then Gerizim was the southern hilltop. And so here we can read about this in the Bible, the way that they were divided up, and they would be shouting back and forth across these hilltops. And so here I am down in the valley. Here I am in Shechem. And so we've got Gerizim over and just a little bit over here, and then Mount Ebal would be like over here, sort of. It was the best panorama I could get. And so it was really cool to be down in the valley in Shechem in this these structures that appear to be temple-like structures where it's likely the priest would have been during this ceremony. Yeah, we can skip over. This was just a picture I took of a sign showing all of the historical artifacts that have been found at Shechem that help them date everything correctly. But I will say, as I get to some of these pictures, when you walk into Shechem, there's a noticeable difference between a Muslim-controlled city in the way they treat their archaeology and a Jewish-controlled city in the way that's treated. Because if like Shechem's in a Muslim-controlled area, and there's hardly any signage, there was actually a burn pit like right outside of where I'm taking these pictures. It's just like people are bringing their trash and just burning it. I mean, it's like a ghetto, okay? And it's not uncommon. They just, why would they care about biblical history, right? Because if the Bible's proven true, then what does that mean for the Quran? Not good news, right? So they don't really care about them. And so I said that would be the last site, but there actually is one more site that's located here that's pretty significant. And that's going to be Jacob's well in John chapter 4 is located in Shechem. So when we read in John chapter 4, and actually I am going to take just a moment to turn there myself, because this is a significant teaching of Jesus in John chapter 4. And so they're down in this land, in Samaria. Let's just go with verse 4. And so Jesus, and he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, that would be Shechem during the time, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there, and so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. And it was about the 6th hour, a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." I'm going to stop there for just a quick second. I'll pick up in verse 10. So the Jews and the Samaritans, they despised one another. There's a lot of political reasons for that. There's a lot of theological reasons for that. But if we can think back in our nation's history to the vitriol of racism that used to be prominent, it would be that type of hatred that the Jews and the Samaritans had for one another. And so Jesus not only is going to a Samaritan, the untouchable class, but he's also going to a woman who's a Samaritan, which is like a double offense. And so Jesus responds in verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." And Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." And Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." And the woman answered him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." And the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem." So when she's saying our fathers worshipped on this mountain, she's pointing to Mount Gerizim. It's where the Samaritans had their temple built. The Samaritans believed they were the correct Jewish line. Okay, they thought they were God's chosen people, and they had a temple on Mount Gerizim, just on the hilltop outside of this Shechem. And they said that the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, that's the blasphemous one. That's not biblically accurate. And Jesus attests to this, okay? But that's what she's referring to here. A place where we ought to worship. And Jesus says to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation is from the Jews, but the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. And when he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Oh, I didn't mean to close my PowerPoint. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that wasn't up there. That is happening right here. Now, obviously there's modern day Catholic style ornamentation around it. But what's incredible, and you're picking up a trend here, right? This well has been preserved all this time. From the time of Jacob to the time of Jesus to the time of today, we have a track record that this well is Jacob's well. And so this would have been, open sky, just on the outer side of the city, people coming to flock here to get water. It would have been in a church like this. But this is where Jesus is sitting with this woman. And he's teaching her that I am the Messiah. I am the one who has come. It is through me that all people can worship in spirit and in truth. It's not through the false temple in Gerizim. It's not even through the right temple in Jerusalem. Worship of God is going to be through me in spirit and truth. And it's incredible to me. It was right there. And now, one final comment, I promise this will be it. The irony wasn't lost on me here. Jesus is giving this teaching about a living water and thirsting for that, because it's the only water that will truly satiate our souls. And the church here is selling bottled water from the well. And you better believe I bought some. And we all did. This is a Muslim-controlled city. I might have a lot of theological and doctrinal disagreements with the Catholic Church that's located there, but I'll be honest, they're in a type of environment we can't understand. And selling these little vases of water is literally the only thing that's keeping them going. And so, plus it makes for a good souvenir too. But the irony was not lost on me on that. And so I had to point that out to my professors. Like, you realize we just bought water from a place where Jesus said not to get water from? Anyway, I'm already way over time. That's where I'll close for this evening. I'll pick up on Wednesday, and I still have 140 slides to go. We're on slide 46 of 180. I'll go a little faster, I promise. But I hope that this has been insightful. And I know Randall has got a closing song. Someone's probably got the invitation. But I hope this has been very encouraging to you. And if you're not able to make it back here Wednesday night, I'll be recording again through the live stream so that you guys can watch it too on Facebook. I'm going to cross-post it to YouTube as soon as I get a chance. Thanks for tolerating me going 15 minutes over.
Tyler had this opportunity. He shared with us this morning that why he went, or one of the reasons that he went, was to get to know better, to be able to connect the dots and connect these maps.